Hey there. Welcome to the Thoughts on Selling podcast. I'm your host, Lee Levitt. Through conversations with fellow sales enablement practitioners, sales leadership, and experts in sales performance, together we'll explore how to improve enterprise sales productivity. This is the beginning of the conversation. I invite you to take a couple of interesting tidbits from the conversation with our guest, talk them through with your team, and then take one specific step to improve your sales productivity. Then let me know how it goes. I want to hear what you learned, the actions you took, and the results you generated. You can find show notes, past podcasts, and a contact form at podcast.thoughtsonselling.com. And now, on to the conversation. Welcome back to the Thoughts on Selling podcast. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to have an old friend join me on the podcast, Judy Sunblade. Judy and I met when we were launching the Boston chapter of the Sales Enablement Society way back in the teens, as the kids say, right?
Way back when.
Way back when. Judy, first question. Who is Judy Sunblade?
Very good question to start, Lee. Actually, a woman with a passion for living life fully, a zest for living, cares about equal rights for all people, and also someone that is passionate about go-to-market strategy and enabling sales reps to be most productive.
That's awesome. We enable salespeople whether they have red hair or brown hair or blonde hair, right?
We do. We do.
We don't distinguish.
Not at all.
That's awesome. You and I are in alignment on that. Again, welcome back. We spent some time trying to figure out what we were going to talk about. And what we were going to talk about is what we are passionate about. Let's talk about sales enablement. When you hear the phrase sales enablement, what comes to mind?
When I hear sales enablement, I actually think of it as an old name for what we do today. It needs to focus on more than just sales enablement. It could be called revenue enablement, commercial enablement. It needs to cover acquisition, new logo acquisition, customer success. It could be channel partners. It's any way that revenue comes into an organization, and those different avenues need to be enabled differently.
Some people call it revenue enablement. How do you
Yes.
feel about that change, which happened, 2-3 years ago now?
I think it's appropriate because you want to look at the revenue streams, all of the revenue streams coming into an organization. And as I mentioned, it can be sales, it could be renewals, retention, channel partners. Those are now especially important in SaaS organizations.
Absolutely. Where years ago when we were selling licenses, we could pass someone a license ID and call them back in 3 years and go, hey, how'd it go?
Yeah.
Today, we have to make sure that satisfaction is maintained every month, because in any month where customer isn't happy, they can say, see ya, bye-bye.
That's definitely has to be part of the equation.
So my perspective on sales enablement or revenue enablement or whatever we want to call it, it's all about changing seller behavior, helping them to see different ways of being so that they engage better with customers to drive better outcomes for everyone. You and I are in alignment on how we both think about enablement. We just use different words to describe it.
We definitely are. And a lot of times people think of sales enablement as people, process, and technology. And I
People
think a
process
lot
and
of
what?
people, process, and their technology, their tech stack. And I really think a lot of times people focus on the process and the technology, and they don't put enough of the effort into the people side. And that's hiring the right people, also providing the skill sets that they need to succeed in the way that buyers buy today.
Judy, we have AI in our technology. We don't need people in process anymore.
The AI actually having the conversations with the buyer.
Oh gosh, I hope not. I'll
Yeah,
have my chatbot call your chatbot.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Even in the AI digital first worldly, it's human connection. It's people. It's also people's attention spans are very limited. They're on social media, they're distracted. So the more concise and clear you can be, the better.
Judy, you bring up a really interesting point. Years ago, you could ask a salesperson or an SE to sit down and consume 20 or 30 minutes of content or an hour of content and expect some level of retention. Today, because we've trained people to doom scroll on Facebook or to consume small quantities of social messaging, they're not accustomed to that longer form consumption. How we enable people has to change. How we make that change, I'm still not positive on because I don't want to go to more technology. I don't want to just break up content pieces into snippets and feed them. Uh, Okay, here's my bias. Adult learning is
Mm.
not much different from childhood learning, where it's watch and try and do. That's how my son taught my daughter how to ride a bicycle. First, she watched him riding the bike. Then he ran alongside her, holding up the bike. Then he let her go. She fell down a few times and then all was good. We don't do that with salespeople, do we?
You were going exactly where I was going to go. And that's, you can do the micro learning. We don't play enough. For training salespeople, we don't put them into scenarios where they have to practice or role play. We give them a script and let them loose. There's got to be play involved. We'd rather have them make a mistake doing a role play than when they get in front of a prospect
Why should they make a mistake in role play?
because they figure out the right way to do it, similar to your daughter riding the bike. She falls
Yeah.
down a couple of times and then gets her balance and she's off to the races. And if they practice it in a role play environment,
Safe space.
yes, exactly. Safe space. They're going to be more successful when they have that first live conversation.
So the first time I run a half marathon, I don't do it from scratch. I do it from building up little bits and pieces here and there. The safe spaces of I'm going to run a 5K. I'm going to run 8 miles. I'm going to see how 12 miles runs. How's my nutrition? How's my hydration? How are my shoes? Then I go out and I run that race. I agree with you. We don't do nearly enough of that. Why? Because it's inefficient. If we're role playing, we're not selling.
And I think there's a trade off. There's always a ramp time to get somebody up to speed. The more you focus on the role playing and like a case study, like an exercise that takes them from prospecting to through to the close, the more they get the foundations correct, the more successful they're going to be when they hit the technical phones.
Yeah. I personally, I love role playing. It's a great opportunity to play in that safe space, to build that muscle memory, to try different things. When you walk in to a new customer's office or you pick up the phone or you're running a call, they don't always follow the script that you have mapped in your head. They go off on a tangent. Something else might be important. When I role play with my coaching clients, I start them off gently, then I don't answer the phone when they call and we see what happens. I call and I answer with my last name, military style. I say, that's not really what I'm focused on right now. I'm doing something else to see if they can pivot. The most important attribute for salespeople for me is curiosity.
I always say that's the old way was always be closing.
Hmm.
Today it's always be curious.
I love that. I haven't heard that before. I love that. Always be curious.
Mhm.
So why? Why do customers care if we're curious?
When we show curiosity, we're asking the right questions. We're getting them to talk about their situation, where their challenges are, and we're not talking about us, our features or benefits, or why the product is best. It's more important to get them to know that we understand them based on the questions we ask. I always say there's two ears, two eyes, and one mouth.
Mm,
And sales reps tend to do it the opposite way, but it's more about the questions you ask than the information you give.
right.
And there's a way of being curious, and that's putting out a piece of data and then providing some insight from the type of work that you're doing, and
Hmm.
then asking a question because it shows that you understand who they are and what they do. You're also providing insight that they may not know. And they're like, Lee's giving me some information I don't know about.
The work that Matt Dixon did and researching for the book Jolt was absolutely fascinating. And his conclusions were people don't need more information. They can Google just as well as anyone. What they need is guidance. How
Yeah.
do I make a decision? What will change? Right? The number one value of a consultant or a doctor or a salesperson should be pattern matching.
Mm.
I've seen this before. Here's what I think will happen next if we make a change or if we don't. And
Oh,
customers don't have that background. They don't see the patterns. right?
Right.
The CIO at Xerox has seen that pattern once.
Mhm.
The CMO at Pfizer has seen that pattern once or twice. When we come to those people with 50 engagements across a variety of industries, we can say, when you do this is typically what's going to happen. And you can't get that from Googling.
No, that's the critical part, Lee. They have so much data available to them. There's so much noise out there.
Mhm.
And it's really helping, like you said, to guide them, to help them feel confident that they're making the right decision. Because there's research shows there's 40 to 60% of all of your qualified deals are going to end in no decision or
Right,
staying with the status quo. And
right.
that's because they don't feel they have the right information to make the decision. With all the layoffs that are occurring and the job market the way it is, people need to feel confident in their decision making, and sales has to help them to get that confidence.
Absolutely. I don't know whether I'd want to be a rep these days because so much has changed, or I would want to be a rep because everyone else think things have changed, and so they're off trying Chat GPT and other crap. I work with a coaching client at, I can't mention the company, but it's 3 letters and its logo is blue. I said to her, "Your superpower is that you listen.
Mm.
You're an empath, and nobody else on your team listens. Everyone else is stuffed full of technology expertise, and they talk and they share. They show off their knowledge. They're proud of the products that this particular company offers, and they don't listen." And her superpower is she can say to them, "This is what's going on with our customer, and this is how we can help them." She's the one that drives the change because the customers value her perspective. They know she's listened.
Like that buyers today need to be seen, heard, and understood. By
Hmm.
listening, they're being seen, they're being heard. By the questions you're asking, they know you understand their situation. You're bringing new insight, new
Hmm.
data into the conversation, but it's a conversation.
Right.
A lot of reps hide behind the PowerPoint presentation. They hide behind and read the slide. The best ones don't even use a PowerPoint presentation. They might use flip charts or whiteboard. They may just have a conversation. And that's where you get the rapport and start building the trust.
I think I shared this with you. I ran strategic accounts for a predictive analytics company. I had 4 accounts, IBM and GE and 2 others. My president said, "You need to learn
Mm.
the deck. You need to demonstrate that you can deliver the deck, and then you need to do that." And I said, "Michael, I sell using a whiteboard." And he says, "That's great, Lee. You're fired." And his perspective was that salespeople should follow the formula because then sales leadership, company leadership can trust that they're all covering the same stuff. That's great. There's great efficiency in failing miserably. The challenge is customers don't want to see those decks.
Especially if they're only talking about the products, if they're only saying how great the organization is. Typically, they have the map of all of their offices, where they're located, and they
Yep,
really don't care until they know you care about solving their number one problem.
exactly. I'm a little sad that most people are following that particular formula. It does mean that those that follow the approach we're outlining, where you actually are empathetic and you listen and you respond, that gives them the advantage. The
It
downside
does.
is we're training customers to expect very little from salespeople generally.
Hmm. There was a statistic, only 25% of executives would have another meeting with a sales rep. So that's
Right.
saying like 75% of them did not find value in the conversation they were having.
Hmm.
So if you can connect the dots and get to the point where you're actually having a real conversation with the CEO or CRO, whoever it might be, and you'll connect better.
Yeah. It's so strange. We've lost the storyline. And in part,
Yes.
it's because there's so much technology trying to get into the sales organizations. They're like, let's be more efficient. Let's spend more money. Nancy Narden posted a map of the sales tech industry years ago, and there were 1,000 brand names on it. And now it must be many thousands. So one, how do you figure out what's good? And then two, how do you figure out what's useful? And then three, how do you actually manage it so that it doesn't overwhelm the salespeople who should be listening to customers?
And I think that's the number one challenge is not overwhelming sales. They'll spend time on the technology. They're looking for the easy button. They're looking for the shortcuts. And I think it complicates and really paralyzes sales teams because they're like, oh, should I use intent data? Should I do this? Should I do that? I get back to even with all this technology, AI, all of that, it gets down to human conversations.
Right. Absolutely. So we've got the old guard, right? People that went to Xerox training or IBM training or whatever training that went through various extended sales process trainings. Those people are now VPs and senior VPs and CROs. The people that are coming up through the ranks now, it's very much a pick up the phone and call or do social selling or use this tool to spit out a script. Are we losing our ability to sell? What's your thought on that?
I think what comes into play as well is there could be 4 or 5 different generations within an
Hmm.
organization from the seller's perspective as well as from the buyer's perspective. And it gets into really knowing who you're selling to, who is the ideal buyer
Hmm.
for the solution you're selling. And
Hmm.
then knowing that there could be variations about how the person buys. And it's really understanding who you're selling to gets back to the problems. That's why I think when you think about CEOs, executives that don't want to take another meeting with a sales rep, is because they're talking about the nuts and bolts of how the product works. And the C level is more concerned about what is it going to solve? What's the return on that investment as
Right.
opposed to the investment? So I think again, it gets back to the basics. If you're not really understanding who you're selling to, then you're trying all these shortcuts and there really isn't a shortcut.
Yeah. We lose sight of the fact in the technical world that when we're done, when we've said closed one, when we've submitted the contracts, when we've got the PO, when we've shipped the product, when we've turned on the application, we're done. That's when the customer starts.
Mm.
That's when they start to really experience the environment. That's when they start to try to integrate disparate data sources. That's when they try to teach their employees how to use the product or the platform or the system. That's when they hope that the results are generated that we sold them on. And they get into the trough of despair, right? What
Mhm.
we got isn't what we expected, right? This environment doesn't match the demo. And very few salespeople are along for that part of the ride. They don't see what happens after the customer says yes. They don't see
Right.
what happens after the customer says install or accept when they're looking at license agreements and not agreements, but the shrink wrap license. And so we don't, as an industry, we don't really understand. The customer success team gets it. Or if we're talking about professional services, the consultants that deliver the work, they
Mhm.
get it.
Yep.
But the typical product salesperson, whether it's hardware or software or cloud services, they don't see any of that. And I think that does a huge disservice to both the customer and to the salesperson that actually wants to help the customer.
Yeah, I think it's mixed. I have seen sales executives that will stay through the implementation and are close because they want to be able to do a make sure they are retained and also do cross sell upsell. So I
Hmm.
think it does depend on how reps are incentivized and who gets paid for what really drives how that happens. And I do agree that it's a disservice. The other thing is I think people deal with it as like an implementation project and it's really a change management, organizational transformation.
Right.
And I think a lot of them don't succeed as well as they should because they're going through the project steps of getting it implemented, but it's changing how people work, changing what they do on a daily basis. And it's really, people are resistant to change. So understanding that it's actually a transformational change project, I think would make it also helpful. And the person that sold it needs to be involved because They know what the problem is that they're solving. They know
Yep.
how they told them they were going to solve it,
Yep.
and keeping that continuity all the way through.
That's what I love about selling professional services. Because when we sell professional services, typically the salesperson or the consultant is involved in delivery. And you do see that change management in process of, okay, here's some training that your team needs. Here's what's going to happen differently in their day to day. And a good salesperson will do this no matter what you're selling. A good salesperson says, here is the context that you need to take to your people so they understand why they need to do something different.
Mhm.
And you can then also map out, here is the expected new behavior, right? Very simple. You move from a sedan to a convertible. What
Mhm.
changes? You have to wear suntan lotion when you're driving the convertible. Simple example, but
Well, and
there's
you
a
also
change.
need to know the mechanics of how does the top go down? Is it
Right.
automatic or not?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was once on the 101 in a rented Miata, and I had to pull over under a bridge to try to figure that out.
Yes. Not, or if it starts raining, how to get it to
It was
close
starting
quickly.
to
Yeah.
rain, which is why I pulled over underneath the overpass. The things that we do in everyday life, we don't think about in sales, right?
Mhm.
When you ask someone to do something differently, that's sales 101. We want you to do something differently. We want you to use our application rather than doing it manually, or use our application versus another application. And if we do map out that change management requirement, here's what's going to be different. The perception of risk goes down, but salespeople are afraid to have that conversation because it sounds complicated.
A lot of salespeople will get a meeting and then they start talking about the feature benefits going into pitching their product. They don't understand that you're getting them to change from what they're doing today or the status quo. And you
Hmm.
actually have to get them to want to change
Right.
before you can have the conversation of what that change looks like.
Right.
Because if they're not uncomfortable or they don't see a better outcome by changing, they're not going to change.
Yeah. I have a client that responded to an RFP, and he thinks his organization wasn't selected for the shortlist in part because he included pricing in his RFP response. And I don't know whether it was required for that,
Hmm.
but I never share pricing until the customer is bought into the process. This sounds good. This sounds like it solves our problem. What does it cost? What's the investment? And of course, people need a ballpark. So you give them a range.
Yes.
It's going to run 2 to a million, or it's going to run 20 to 100. It depends
Mhm.
on what we find in our discovery. It depends on what your specific needs are. We may find out that this actually isn't a good fit.
And I also
Right.
think with with RFPs, people respond just to respond to the RFP without having a conversation with somebody from the selection team. And I
Uh-huh.
know some folks will say that we don't speak to anybody. We'll do a Q&A on such and such a day. Great. Join that Q&A, get an idea. But I think sometimes a lot of organizations just respond to the RFP and it might not be in their best interest or use of their time
Right.
because if they won't allow you to have the conversation or you weren't part of the original conversation, then it's been designed for somebody else.
Absolutely. I mentioned discovery.
Hmm.
It's my experience that most organizations look at discovery and most customers perceive discovery as a process of figuring out how should we sell to them most effectively and how do we scope it. Personally, I like how Gerhard Geschwanter thinks about discovery. He says it's co-creation.
Mm.
Discovery is not a series of questions of, okay, how many seats do you need and how many gigabytes do you move and how many virtual machines do you have and how many regions is it in and what do you need the response time to be? That's all prepping the proposal. That's scoping the proposal. Discovery starts in the first conversation and it really should be focused on helping the customer discover a new way of running their business, a new way of delivering results.
Mhm.
But we don't think of discovery that way generally.
No,
We
you're right.
we we ask a lot of questions. We make a lot of withdrawals from our relationship bank account when we don't have a balance.
Hmm.
And from personal experience, I know how that works. If you make a withdrawal and there's nothing in the bank, you get a nasty note from your banker
With a fee attached.
with a fee attached.
You're spot on, Lee. I think it's everybody has a different definition for discovery, But again, it gets back to they have to see a need to change
Hmm.
before you go into the nuts and bolts of how the solution works and all. And I love the word. I have never seen it or heard it used that way before, but co-create what the solution could look like. The more they feel seen, heard, and understood and trust you, then they're going to be more likely to co-create with you. And then you're doing it together down the road so that when it comes to the proposal or contract signing, you've had small yeses along the way and
Hmm.
know that's going to lead to, okay, if we do this, we're going to go to proposal and then you're going to sign. It makes the negotiation part easier.
So, Judy, tell me what you're working on these days.
I have working on go to market strategy for a couple, I'd say high growth technology organizations. And then also working with small to medium sized businesses from 10 million up to 100 million
Hmm.
on really what is a go to market strategy, working with developing their salespeople, focusing on the people side and performance.
And of all of what you just outlined, and I can just imagine the 7,000 bullet points that fit underneath those major categories. What are some of your favorite areas to focus on in go to market?
It's actually, first of all, it's alignment so that the buyer's experience is similar in marketing, in sales, and then also in customer success.
Mm.
It's around messaging. It's around being able to have that conversation, storytelling skills, where the buyer's the hero in the story, really focusing on the fundamentals of lead gen, like focusing on leads, understanding the problem.
Mm.
It's really the top end of the funnel, making sure that they're able to have conversations and meet their buyer where they are and that the messaging is sales ready. It's not branding. It's not technical. I should say it should be buyer ready, really, instead of
Right.
sales ready, so that it's in words that the buyers understand. I work a lot on sales decks, and I have one prospect that thinks that the deck should be all about the organization. It should be all about like why they do it and et cetera. And it's not anything in the language of the customer. They didn't talk to customers when they were developing. They didn't talk to sales when they were developing. It was the CEO and the CRO wanted it this way. And it's not landing for customers. It's not landing for sales and
Right.
trying to convince them that it needs a rewrite.
Yeah. I love working with product managers to help them become sales ready. Here's the approach I used when I was in enablement at Google. One third of your enablement presentation is about the market.
Mhm.
And by the market, the customer. What's their problem? What are they doing now? How are they solving the problem now? How do we help them solve the problem with our stuff?
Mhm.
And the second part is indeed about the product. And the third is the ICP, the go to market messaging, and who the support people are internally. And that came as quite a revelation to the product marketing people that I worked with because their decks in the past had been 100% that middle piece, all
Yes.
about the product.
Mhm.
And my favorite thing to start with is take TAM out of your slides because everyone would start off with TAM.
Mhm.
They would say the total available market is huge and you should get your fair share of it. That's great for product managers because they sit with finance and executive leadership saying, I need an investment in my product because it's a big
Mhm.
and growing market. Or if you're trying to get investments, this is a big and growing market. But for my friend Sally in Chicago, she doesn't give a shit about TAM. She's got
Right.
3 accounts, right?
Yep.
TAM is $10 billion. Her 3 accounts have a combined $50 million in total spend, total budget. She doesn't give a crap about TAM. What she
Right.
cares about is total relevant market,
Mhm.
right? What what share of wallet should I get with my 3 accounts? And how do I displace the incumbent? How do I get entry in and do a land and expand? Product managers don't get that. They don't
No.
understand sales doesn't work from a top-down perspective. It's always bottom up.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's a great segue is the product marketing side because they used to just give you like the technical doc, like when sales enablement was new or a young department, they would give you the technical documentation of how the product worked and how to actually you implement it. But again, it wouldn't focus on the problem you're solving, the return and the outcome that can be expected. And you're right. And to make enablement's job easier, product marketing has to step up as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad enablement that happens because we don't ask the simple questions of who's the market,
Hmm.
and this is an internal market, right? For starters, who's the market? What actions do we want them to take? What does good look like? And if they actually get someone on the hook, if they actually find a prospect, who do they reach out to for help internally?
Mm.
Facilitation is all about making it easy. That's what the word facilitation means, to make easy. And as sales enablement people or as revenue enablement people, we get to facilitate how salespeople can perform better. We have the opportunity to make it easier for them. And when we go to them with an incomplete set of information, we leave out the here's how to work with channel partners, or here's where to get first tier support, or here's how to escalate things, or whatever. Here's some success stories. Then
Mm.
we're not making it easy for them. We're making it harder. And most salespeople vote with their feet, right? If they have a portfolio and something is easy to sell and something is hard to sell, they're going to focus on what's easy.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes, to your point, Lee, we don't educate them on the whole process. If they get questions about how is it going to be implemented or what happens if we have a problem, who do we contact? The sales exec should really be like the orchestra leader. They they get the venue, they get the opportunity, then they start figuring out who they need to help to move the conversation and keep the deal momentum going. I think several fail when they try to do it all on their own.
Right.
And their job is, to your point, that enablement facilitates sales, but sales needs to facilitate the buyer or the buying journey. It's
Sales needs to facilitate the buying journey.
again, it gets back to that they need to, they first of all, they need to change. You've got to help them feel they're making a confident, qualified decision. And it's
Mhm.
really sales tries to sell them on something, but they really have to help facilitate the buying process.
And that gets back to the conversation we had about Matt Dixon, and buyers need support making decisions.
Yes.
They don't know how to make decisions, and they need help making the decisions.
Like sometimes they don't really understand how to present the buying decision to the executive team.
Mhm.
So it's also helping them to feel confident that they have the right information, the right data, the right ROI, the outcome, et cetera, to make the presentation to the executive team or the board to get the funding for the project. I know a lot of times we can talk about BANT. That used to be the way of qualifying years ago. And in some cases, it's still the way of qualifying. But I really think the first one has to be a need or a problem. And then
Mhm.
if you're calling high enough or speaking high enough in the organization, if the problem's big enough, they're going to find the money.
They're gonna find the money. Absolutely. You took the words right out of my mouth, Judy. I don't give a crap about budget. I don't wanna find budget. I wanna find no budget. Because if I find budget, that means probably someone else has already influenced the customer's thinking,
Well,
right?
and some of my background is in cybersecurity.
Mhm.
And when you're dealing in cybersecurity, it's not always in one department.
Right.
Again, to facilitate the buying journey, you've got
Right.
to uncover who has the budget and which department is it, and quilt it together or piece it together to illustrate that there is budget to make the purchase.
Sometimes you go tin canning to different groups,
Yes.
or you help the customer go tin canning to different groups.
And that's
I've
what I
s
mean. Again, helping the customer to be able to solve their problem by
Right.
helping them to uncover where the budget is. Because they're like, oh, I don't have budget.
That's okay.
Yeah.
No
Whose
problem.
responsibility is it to solve the problem?
If we can help you demonstrate that this problem is big enough, do you think your CFO will actually find some money?
Yes. Because in budgets, there's always money set aside for things like that.
Slush. We call it slush.
Yes. Yeah.
Give me
The
some
slush
slush,
fund.
please.
Yeah.
I'd like some slush.
Yes.
We
In
work for
today's,
slush.
I like, let's see, a black cherry slush.
There you go.
Um, but we touched upon it earlier. I think sales wants the easy button. And when it comes time to facilitate the buying process, they don't know what to do. And I think that's where enablement falls short on that training, that skill set development.
Right.
I'll just end on what we started with, and that's always be curious.
I love that, Judy. Always ABC. Always be curious. So a
Mhm.
couple of key takeaways. Number one, always be curious. That's a fabulous mantra. Two, listen rather than talk.
Mhm.
And by listen, like actually listen. Talking and waiting to talk were the two modes of listening.
Yeah, it's active listening.
Yeah, yeah. So number two, listen to the customer and guide them. Don't just listen without input. Guide them as to where they can go. I took an improvisation workshop recently,
Mm.
which was fabulous training on really active listening. You have to be watching and listening intently so that you can take what your partner gives you as an offer and do something relevant with it.
Mhm.
That's the essence of sales.
Yes.
Yeah. And then the third takeaway is let's get back to basics. The sales technology stack is not going to drive our ability to make quota, to hit our targets in
Mhm.
2025 or beyond. It will either facilitate or get in the way, but it's not what causes customers to consider different ways of doing business. It's people talking to people about how to do things better.
Yes.
Judy, where can people reach you?
You can reach me at judy@nextlevelenablement.com
Great.
and always on LinkedIn as well.
Yep.
I'm Judy Sunblade on LinkedIn.
Perfect. And I'll put those links in the show notes for you. This has been fabulous. I appreciate the time. As always, we'll have to get together again sometime soon and have another conversation about the state of enablement and the state of sales.
Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you, Judy. And that's a wrap. Another great deep dive into the topic of sales performance improvement. I like to end a session with specific actions. So remember, please take one or two interesting tidbits from this conversation, talk them through with your team, and take one specific step to improve your sales productivity, and let me know how it goes. We'd love your feedback on the podcast, and I'd really appreciate it if you would recommend this podcast to one or two coworkers. You can find show notes, past podcasts, and a contact form at podcast.thoughtsonselling.com. Thanks for listening.